Okay, here's a quick review about Chapter 15 and the division of the United States leading up to the Civil War and a few review questions. The division continues to increase when California is ready to become a state. It is in both the North and South by the Missouri Compromise line, so there'll be a big debate of whether California should be free or slave, a free or slave state. In the end, they came up with a compromise. The compromise was created by Henry Clay, the great compromiser, and California will become a free state. But the Southerners will get a stronger Fugitive Slave Act, which will allow them to travel into the North and recapture African Americans who were accused of being enslaved. Speaking of the Fugitive Slave Act, it was very unfair. The commissioners or judges who decided the cases about fugitive slaves were paid $10 to send slaves back to, or send African Americans back to slavery, and $5 to let them free. Far more were sent back to slavery. And in fact, slave hunters would go into the South and kidnap free African Americans and accuse them of being fugitive slaves and bring them back into slavery and sell them into slavery. So the Fugitive Slave Act made no African Americans safe in the United States. And the Underground Railroad will have to go all the way to Canada for true safety and freedom. The next area of slave debate will be in Kansas. Kansas is ready to become a state. Stephen Douglas, a very powerful senator from Illinois, will negotiate to put Kansas up for popular sovereignty and get rid of the Missouri Compromise so that a railroad line could be moved through his home state into some land that he had owned so that he could sell it to the railroad company. It was a very corrupt deal. In the end, because of popular sovereignty or voting in Kansas over slavery, the most extreme anti-slavery people and the most extreme pro-slavery people will live next to each other in Kansas. Gunfire breaks out in Lawrence, Kansas, with an attack by the pro-slavery people. At Potawatomi Creek, John Brown, an abolitionist, a violent abolitionist, will attack pro-slavery people in the middle of the night, killing 5. In all, 200 people were killed during the Bleeding Kansas back and forth between the both sides. John Brown will then turn his attention to the east after his attack in Potawatomi Creek, and he will attack Harper's Ferry, Virginia. He will take control of a federal arsenal or fort carrying weapons there. In his plan, he was hoping to use those weapons to arm slaves and have them fight for their freedom, but no slaves came to help him, so he was stuck with a bunch of weapons and no one to really use them. He had a shootout with the local slave owners, but eventually the U.S. Army, led by General Robert E. Lee, will come down and capture him and kill his men. He will be put on trial for treason against the United States, and he will be hung for what he did. Abraham Lincoln will be failing his way to success in the Midwest at this time. He will fail at all kinds of elections and all kinds of business practices, but every time he keeps going, keeps learning, and he has his big breakthrough in his campaign in 1858 against Stephen Douglas, a very powerful senator from Illinois. Although he loses the campaign, his debates with Douglas over slavery will capture the nation's attention and make Lincoln a prime presidential candidate in 1860, where he will win the election of 1860 for the Republican Party, despite never campaigning in the South at all. He is seen as a huge threat to the slave owners, and the Southerners will hate him, and consider secession when he's elected as president. Speaking of succession, why did the Southerners secede? Well, they wanted to maintain their lifestyle of slavery, and they thought that Lincoln and the Northerners were going to take that. They claimed they had states' rights because they joined the Union voluntarily as states in the beginning after the American Revolution, when the colonies joined together to form the United States of America. They felt like they had the right to leave the United States whenever they wanted to. But the reason they're doing this is to continue slavery. They formed a new nation, at least in their minds, called the Confederate States of America. They'll make the capital Richmond, Virginia, and they'll name their first and only president to be Jefferson Davis. At this point, we are on the edge of civil war because Abraham Lincoln and the Northerners are not going to allow these southern states to form their own nation to leave the United States. So we're right on the edge of the violence of the Civil War, which will tear the country apart. Review questions that are going to be on the quiz. You need to know Native American relations, How did the Native Americans and the early colonists get along? Sometimes they fought, like they did in Jamestown. Sometimes they got along, like Squanto did, showing the Pilgrims how to grow crops properly. Of course, you have like Pocahontas married John Rolfe, causing some peace in Jamestown. But in general, the English colonists and the Native Americans did not get along particularly well because the English were trying to take their land. You need to know the French and Indian War, which is a war between the British versus the French and the Indians. There were a few Indians that were on the Iroquois Indians were on the British side as well. In the end, the British won the war. The war was caused because of a conflict over land and tension between the French and the British all over the world. The British will win the war and take the French and the Indian land in North America. You need to know the cause of the American Revolution, which is taxation without representation, and the idea that the Patriots could create a better society than the British they believe they should and could. You need to know the purpose of the Constitution, which is to protect the rights of the people and limit the power of the government and organize the government. You need to know that the Constitution was better than the Articles of Confederation because it allowed the government to have at least enough power to get some things done and the power to raise money to get things done. Hope this was helpful. Thanks.